Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this new meeting of Myths and Mysteries of Egypt. Lecture number 4. We start again with our diagram of cosmic, earthly, and human evolution. In the last lecture, Steiner told us how, from the second half, and in particular increasingly in the last third of the Atlantean era, the content of the meditations of the disciples of the mysteries centered on the human figure and in particular on the countenance of man. The whole of the soul life in thoughts, feelings, and will impulses was centered on the human figure and the human face, hence on the necessity to develop the whole human figure and in particular the human face. In this way, the animal man, be it an eagle, lion, or bull man, turned in meditation to his future being as a human man, with a human face, and consequently also a whole human figure. However, we must imagine, Steiner tells us, that this figure on which the meditation of the disciples of the mysteries of Atlantis was centered was the union of a man and a woman, without the lower parts of the body. It was the image of a cosmic human being, the image of a cosmic man-woman, we could say, a united man-woman whose dimensions extended throughout the cosmos, but who didn't yet have the lower parts. To get an idea of what the disciple was thinking of, we might imagine an androgynous being, a human being who contained in itself the whole cosmos and from whom the whole cosmos would later be differentiated. In particular, only the upper part was visible, while the lower part, below the solar plexus, was still to be formed. By meditating on this figure, the disciple gradually journeyed back to the time when the evolution of the earth was a unity. So he went from multiplicity to trinity, to duality to unity. He went backwards in the evolution of the earth. So, also referring to the diagram, he went backwards from the Atlantean or Atlantic era to the Hyperborean Lemurian era up to the Polarian era, thus passing through multiplicity, trinity or triplicity, duality, and then unity. He therefore reached that point in the evolution of the earth when earth, moon, and sun had not yet separated, when everything was still united in a cosmic seed in the Polarian era. At the beginning of the current evolution of the earth, in those primordial times, there existed the seed of the planet Earth, where the whole cosmos, the whole of nature, was one with the human being. In a way, there was no difference. We could talk about the cosmos, nature, and the human being, and they would be the same thing. In those primordial times, in the Polarian era, Earth and man were one. And nature, too, was interwoven, so to speak, between earth and man. So that it could be said, in fact, that the whole planet was man and man was the whole planet. This is also because, as you know, the Polarian era was a recapitulation of ancient Saturn, where in fact everything was originally in unity. In the Polarian era, then, which is a recapitulation of ancient Saturn on present Earth, at the origin of present Earth, everything had to be in unity and differentiate later. So, from what we can call a cosmic Adam Eve, or in a Kabbalistic sense, Adam Kadmon, therefore the Adam of light, the cosmic Adam, from this cosmic being, all the planets and the kingdoms of nature differentiated. Only later did the Adam Kadmon appear through differentiation from this cosmic human being, as did plants, minerals, animals, as well as all the other celestial bodies. The celestial bodies in the cosmos, the orbits of the planets, and the planets in their orbits. And on Earth, the kingdoms of nature. And finally, the physical human being also appeared from the spiritual man. The disciple of the mysteries of Atlantis, then, in this Atlantean initiation, understood how man, nature, and the cosmos were intimately united as if they were one. He understood that creation had been brought about by divinities who had worked by means of the fiat, the word that creates worlds, the creative word that had created the human being together with the earth, with nature, with the cosmos. The disciple of the mysteries of Atlantis, by broadening his vision, imagine that this vision could breathe and expand, saw how from the human figure there arose the figures of animals, plants, and minerals, just as those of the other planets and celestial spheres had arisen. He perceived how all the kingdoms of nature had progressively descended from the spiritual man, the Adam Kadmon, by emanation and differentiation. This ancient Atlantean initiation continued to be practiced, as we have seen, for a long time, even after the Great Flood, into the Paleo-Indian and Paleo-Persian cultures, and further on, as traces of it are found in the Egypto-Chaldean up to the first half of the Greco-Roman culture. This primordial unity of nature, man, and the cosmos was still the Brahman, and the Brahman was at the heart of the meditations of the ancient Indians, as was mentioned in the previous lecture. The archetypal man had been created by the breath of the eternal spirit, in which earth, sun, and moon were still one. The Indian disciples, therefore, felt the image of the Brahman as connected with everything that existed around them, and which they considered an illusion, the Maya, because they were still able to perceive the one, the Brahman, very strongly. They were able to understand how Brahman had expanded and differentiated in itself so as to become the cosmos, earth, nature, and finally man. Indeed, man was a microcosm and the cosmos was, quote unquote, a macro man. Therefore, starting from this inner meditative image of Brahman, or Adam Kadmon, if you like, they were able to experience all the evolutionary stages that had led from the Polarian era to after the flood to the fifth post-Atlantean era, our current one, and they were able to experience the bringing back to primordial unity of all the differentiation that had taken place in order to get to multiplicity, which for the ancient Indian was Maya. This means that what humanity in the Paleo-Indian era was beginning to experience externally as the cosmos was also the foundation of man's interiority. The endeavor was to overcome the illusion of multiplicity and the illusion of the personal self, multiplicity in nature, the personal self in the human being, and individual man. When Alexander the Great arrived in India in 326 before Christ, he encountered the last echoes of this initiation. In fact, we know that Alexander the Great was the previous incarnation of Ita Wegman, the esoteric disciple of Rudolf Steiner. The two worked together at expanding medicine in an anthroposophical sense, and she represented and was one of the carriers of the scientific impulse in the original direction of Goetheanum. We were saying, when Alexander the Great arrived in India with his men, they encountered the last echoes of the Brahman initiation, this Paleo-Indian initiation that in turn was heir to the Atlantean one of the time before the Great Flood. And Alexander the Great himself experienced how the entity that the Indians called Brahman was the same as the one the Greeks called Hercules. We saw, for those who attended the seminar on the 12 labors of Hercules, the 12 gates of the cosmos, that there are two dimensions of Hercules. One is that of the human who becomes divine, and the other is that of the divine who becomes human. These two currents cross over each other. Hercules, in a human sense, who gradually becomes divine through his 12 labors, and the Hercules who has been divinized, who has become a god among the 12 Olympians, who gives humanity the impulses that will allow humanity itself to become a divinity. Therefore, the Brahman of the ancient Indians was the same deified Hercules of the Greeks, and in the same way, the forces that unite man and cosmos in oneness were called the Va of Brahman, the same as the ether that emanated from the deified Hercules. So the Va, or the ether that emanated from the deified Hercules, this, we could say, primordial cosmic ether, had woven all of creation. In this way, the ancient Atlantean initiation passed to India after the Great Flood, and as an echo, reached ancient Greece thanks to Alexander the Great. Thus, it was what we can call the civilizing impulse of Alexander the Great that brought it back as this ancient initiation, an echo, as a memory, and reawakened it in the Greek people. The soul of the disciples of the ancient mysteries, we are referring in general to all the mysteries from the flood until Christ, could return to the primordial times through the memory of the Atlantean initiation, which continued to operate as an experience of the ancient mysteries. Therefore, the foundation of all ancient mysteries is the Atlantean initiation, which was continually awakened and reawakened. Moreover, the way in which it was awakened and reawakened, let's say as a formula, was this: by names and images, all the divine forces can be awakened and reawakened in the human soul. So through the power of names, of the word, and of images, in such a way that these worked magically on the soul of the disciple. The masters worked magically on the soul of the disciple through the names and the image, so that these ancient Atlantean memories got to be gradually reawakened in the consciousness of each cultural epoch. In this way, the initiates of the ancient mysteries were elevated to sublime heights, so that the sense-physical world was perceived as if it were a grain of sand, a small crystal, like a small seed. This seed was in turn surrounded by etheric formative currents and suspended in clouds, clouds of color in the astral world. This grain of sand, which is the sense-physical world, a concretion of the more subtle worlds, was enveloped in the etheric forces, forces that are in continuous movement and radiated an aura of color of the astral world, the forces of the astral world. But its foundation was even higher because it was supported by spiritual foundations, rooted in the spiritual world, in the lower Devachan, and even more in the higher Devachan. So we can imagine that this experience that the initiates of the ancient mysteries had was like turning inside out, so to speak, the shoe of their perception of the physical world. While for us today everything seems to be based on the physical world, the initiation of the ancient mysteries turned this perception on its head, so that the physical world was perceived as only a small creation of the spiritual worlds in which its root, its foundation resided. Then finally, having risen to these sublime heights of the higher spiritual world, of the higher Devachan, one arrived at the spiritual foundations of the physical world and its illusion of the Maya. And there the initiate of the ancient mysteries was in the presence of the gods in their own world, in the world of the gods, where finally one could also glimpse the archetypal self, or, in other words, the Brahman, from which all worlds originate and to which all worlds return, the Adam Kadmon, the cosmic man. There are many names. Every culture has given it its own name. There the initiate was readmitted to the presence of the gods as a child of the gods, recognized as a child of those very gods that he encountered right where the foundations of existence lay. Thus, this experience was not only one of elevation towards the higher Devachan, but also an overturning of the usual perception of the sense-physical world. And in that is why, as I was saying, the human being is a microcosm, but if I turn it inside out, I find that the cosmos are inside, and this is a macro man. This is what is meant by turning the shoe inside out in the sense of initiation. The masters of the ancient Indian cultural epoch, or Paleo-Indian epoch, were the 7 holy rishis, who in turn had been the disciples of Manu, the guide who led humanity out of Atlantis through the Great Flood and conducted them to Central Asia. The first current that was sent out after Atlantis became the root of the Paleo-Indian epoch, which emerged from the lead of these 7 holy rishis, disciples of the Manu. Now, the 7 holy rishis are the 7 masters of the Paleo-Indian epoch. Therefore, the Paleo-Indian epoch has 7 masters. And each of these masters incorporated one of the 7 etheric bodies of those who had been the hierophants of the oracles of Atlantis. or the Atlantean wisdom literally lived in the 7 holy rishis. It was their etheric body. And through this experience, they made their disciples experience the reversal that occurred within the initiation, the sublime cosmic conditions that made them rise from the sense-physical world to the higher Devachan. To understand the origin of the forces of the 7 holy rishis, let's imagine how everything was originally united in a seed, in a primordial cosmic egg, when the earth, man, the cosmos and nature were one. From this seed, a subtle substance was propelled, that was in continuous movement, the primordial cosmic ether, which expanded in the cosmos and progressively condensed, generating the celestial spheres, the planet orbits with the celestial bodies of the planets. From this cosmic etheric substance, the planets, the sun and the moon, the earth and every celestial sphere with its planet progressively condensed and became, as we have seen, an environment suitable for the evolution of certain groups of spirits. So why are we talking about the spirits of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon and Earth? Because from the original unity in which all was united in a single evolution, we could call it a multiple evolutionary current, as the celestial bodies separated and their orbits were defined, differentiating from this primordial cosmic egg or seed, the spirits followed the bodies of the planets where the environment was suitable for their own evolution, from the most evolved to the least evolved. Bear in mind that on every planet dwell spirits that are evolved to a certain degree, and on every moon of that planet dwell spirits that are less evolved than those of the planet itself. For instance, if we take Earth and a satellite, the Moon, Earth is at a certain degree of evolution and the Moon is one step behind the Earth's evolution. The same is true for all the planets. Mars, for example, has 2 satellites, Phobos and Deimos. On Phobos and Deimos dwell the spirits of Mars that have not reached the same degree of evolution as the spirits of the planet Mars, and so on. To delve deeper into this image, let's bear in mind that from this unity a multiplicity occurred that is actually a heptaplicity, that is, there are 7 planets that have differentiated from this original unit, and hosts of spirits have found the suitable environment for evolution in each planetary sphere. Just as the sun was extracted from the earth by evolved spirits who could no longer bear the slowness of the earth's evolutionary rhythm, especially because it was still united with the moon, in the same way there were some spirits who, although more evolved than the earthly ones, were less evolved than the solar ones. So, when the mass of the sun separated from the earth in the middle of the Hyperborean era, another mass detached from the sun. The sun had already detached from the earth-moon, and another mass detached from the sun. We call this mass Venus-Mercury. From this we can understand, from its very name, that this mass in turn differentiated into what we call Venus and what we call Mercury. Thus, they became environments suitable for the evolution of spirits more evolved than those on the Earth, but less so than those on the Sun. So, taking earthly evolution as a reference point, the less evolved spirits that were still on Earth were sent to the Moon. The more evolved spirits were sent to the Sun, but they were differentiated into 3 groups: the solar group, the Venusian group of Venus, and the mercurial group of Mercury. In this way, we can say that a continuity is created in the evolutionary chain that goes from the Moon to the Sun, because we have the Moon 1 degree behind the Earth, then Sun 2 degrees ahead, and Venus and Mercury in between. Moreover, Steiner makes an aside here that I'll report for the sake of completeness, but we won't go into it in depth. The names of these 2 planets, Venus and Mercury, have been interchanged in the course of history, in the times that go from the centuries after Christ through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. What does this mean? It means that the planet Venus, the one we currently call Venus, is actually Mercury, just as the planet Mercury, as we currently call it, was originally the planet Venus. The names of these 2 planets have been interchanged, so that in anthroposophical literature, you sometimes find Venus referred to as a cult Mercury and Mercury as a cult Venus. Obviously, when this is the case, it is specified. This inversion occurred at the transition between the geocentric and the heliocentric systems in the course of the history of science. It was an inversion done on purpose. Keep in mind that astronomers and astrologers were still the same thing, and they were also initiates. As a consequence, these names were deliberately interchanged to prevent certain esoteric secrets concerning these 2 spheres from being revealed in a context that was gradually becoming non-esoteric, a purely exterior, materialistic scientific context. So bear in mind this note that we're mentioning in passing. It is important as regards esoteric astrology, but in this lecture, it's just an aside. Coming back to our main point, the spirits of Venus and Mercury are at an evolutionary degree that is situated between that of Earth and Sun. Venus and Mercury are subsolar planets, that is, they are below the Sun, if we use the geocentric system as a reference. So below the Sun we have Venus, Mercury, Moon, and Earth. And by the same token, we have the supersolar planets, that is Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, that had separated even before the Sun, and that became home to spirits that in some ways were more evolved than those of the Sun itself, but that in other ways had not yet developed the ability to donate the life ether as the spirits of the Sun do. Therefore, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars are the dwelling places of hosts of spirits that have certain more evolved bodies, but that don't have the same ability, so to speak, of radiating and giving themselves as life to the cosmos as the solar spirits do. The spirits that inhabit are the celestial spheres, therefore all 7 of them, but we could also add Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, as well as other celestial bodies, are always in relation with the Earth. Here you see an image by Knapp, who was an illustrator of esoteric books, a symbolic image representing the cosmic egg that differentiates internally. Therefore, from unity to trinity to 7 and then 12, according to the internal relationships between the initiates, who are gathered around the one, which is placed like an altar of the sacred fire, the yod, on 3 steps at the center of an equilateral triangle. Well, this is a way to imagine it. It's an imagination, of course. We also have the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac, the 4 cherubs, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, the 4 cosmic directions. You see, this is an image that can help us to form an idea of what the relationships were like between the ancient initiates, the 7 holy rishis, who we can imagine are these 7, and between the hosts of spirits that inhabit the planets at different degrees of evolution. So, at the time of the Manu, there was a correspondence between the relationships of the hosts of spirits that inhabited different celestial spheres and the 7 holy rishis gathered around the one who was the master of the 7 holy rishis. These relationships, in particular through Mercury and Venus, which being subsolar are closer to the Earth, had been preparing the present evolutionary conditions already since the separation of the Sun from the Earth in the Hyperborean era, because the masters were evolved human souls already at the beginnings of the Earth. It was precisely those evolved souls that were able to monitor, we could say, for a certain time, the most evolved spirits that left the Earth. In the so-called lunar crisis, in the middle of the Lemurian era, human souls left the Earth, and only those we call Adam and Eve remained. The less evolved souls were sent to the moon, but the more evolved souls went to other planets. Those who were closest to the Elohim, the spirits of the sun, were the very ones we call the masters, who therefore spent most of this time of the lunar crisis on Venus, the planet, or better still, the sphere of consciousness closer to the sun itself, directly receiving the radiation of the Elohim. So, in fact, the souls of the masters were the most advanced, starting already from the Hyperborean era, where the Sun left the Earth and when Venus and Mercury gradually differentiated. This is how these spirits of the planets, who are in fact the Elohim themselves, and the hosts, influenced Earth and humanity. And this still happens every moment, everywhere. Let me give an example. The Elohim, who are the spirits of the planets, or rather the eye of the planets, hold together the form of everything that exists. They hold it together, they are called the spirits of form, because their consciousness is so steady that they are able to hold together, think of it as a cosmic exercise of concentration, a cosmic first exercise. They're able to hold together the forms that we perceive of the sense physical world. So we could say that to the extent that we are in the forms of the physical world, we live in the exercise of concentration of the Elohim. Obviously, you should take this with a grain of salt, but it gives you an inner idea of what happens. And they are in relation to one another, in particular, through the sphere of the sun, meaning that the planets are in relation to the sphere of the sun, to the sphere of the moon, which acts as a mirror and concentrate these influences, and to Earth, and therefore to humanity and all of nature. So let's bear in mind that from the start there were necessarily those who were the first to experience these influences in their consciousness, in particular the influence of the Elohim, of the spirits of form, and who prepared the subsequent evolution of humanity. It is for this reason that the oracles of the planets came into being in the mysteries of Atlantis, with their hierophants, and in the same way, in order to maintain continuity in the cultivation of the Atlantean mysteries, the man who prepared the 7 holy rishis in the Paleo-Indian epoch, in the ancient Indian epoch. The man who was the guardian of the Sun Oracle of Atlantis, which, if we recall, was the only one to remain completely intact through and after the decline of Atlantis. In our last meeting, we talked about that decadence caused by the rebellion of those that are called the Watchers, the Grigori, and by the generation of the Nephilim, the giants, which in turn led to the betrayal of the mysteries of Vulcan and of the moon by the black magicians of Turon in the middle of the Atlantean era. The only oracle that was withdrawn when the evolution of Atlantis began to degenerate due to the rebellion of the Grigori, the generation of the Nephilim and the Turanian black magicians, was the oracle of the sun. It was withdrawn so as to preserve it, and the Manu became the guardian of this oracle. Only on the basis of this oracle could all the others that had suffered the decadent influences be, we can say, resurrected. Through the initiation of the 7 holy rishis, who were his disciples, the Manu ensured that the etheric bodies cultivated by the hierophants of the oracles of Atlantis over many incarnations were transferred to them. Therefore, we can say that the 7 holy rishis were the reincarnation in human form of the 7 oracles of Atlantis. Just as there were 7 planets on which 7 hosts of spirits led their own evolution and were in a harmonious relationship with the earth. In the same way, there were 7 holy masters of humanity who gave the human communities scattered and devastated after the flood the evolutionary impulses for the brotherly union of humanity. Moreover, in this phase, the etheric bodies of the 7 holy rishis were transferred to initiates who were dispersed in various regions of the earth to restore civilization. Several initiates gradually revealed themselves to the different cultures of the Mediterranean, of Africa, of Asia, and also of the Americas, had within them the forces of the etheric bodies emanated by the 7 holy rishis, who were, we could say, the strings played by the Manu himself in his harmony of the human spheres. So we could say that the Manu played the 7 holy rishis in a cosmic harmony, and they emanated these forces of the etheric bodies of the oracles of Atlantis wherever there was a need to restore the human civilization after the flood. And remember, as Steiner also said in the previous lecture, that more evolved evolutionary currents were combined with others that had remained behind so as to create the right intermediate conditions for the evolution of both the more advanced souls and the less advanced ones. So it was a 7-fold community of spirit, founded on the mysteries of the 7 planets, of the 7 oracles of Atlantis. And the Manu was, on the other hand, the guardian both of the primordial unity of the planets, what was the original man Earth, the primordial unity, this cosmic seed, where Earth and man were one, and of what we can call the mysteries of the octave of earthly evolution. The Manu was the guardian both of those mysteries concerning the higher octave of the evolution of the earth, that is, the mysteries of the white moon and of the future Jupiter, and also the lower octave of the evolution of the earth, that is, the black moon and the eighth sphere. The mysteries regarding how evolution could proceed either in an evolutionary or anti-revolutionary sense. Therefore, the Manu, together with the 7 holy rishis, were the guardians of the sevenfold evolution of the human being, the earth and the cosmos, in such a way that the 7 holy rishis were themselves representatives of the cosmic evolutionary processes, the ancient ones, ancient Saturn, Sun and Moon, the Earth, and the future ones, Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan. This perfect harmony, this resonance between the 7 holy rishis and the Manu was the archetype of the human community that could be resurrected after the flood. It had gone into decline in the middle of the Atlantean era. It had been destroyed by the flood, and now, after the flood, a new form could be resurrected in the post-Atlantean era. The core of this was the relationship between the Manu and the 7 holy rishis. Thus, the 7 holy rishis raised the disciples to the most sublime celestial spheres and made them ascend to all the worlds. In the etheric world, they experienced etheric formative forces. In the astral world, they experienced cosmic images. And in the spiritual world, the Devachan, they heard the harmony of the spheres of the 7 planets. The disciples were thus elevated to this sublime experience, culminating in the resonance of the word that creates worlds, the fiat. The Indians called it Va, the Egyptians called it Ptah, the Latins called it vox, the voice. For the Atlanteans, it was the Tao. The word that creates worlds. Where everything was in potential and everything gradually would come into being. There, in the spiritual world, where the eternal archetypes of the cosmos reside, the cosmic man, Brahman, pronounced the word that creates worlds. And to the resonance of this word that creates worlds, a cosmic rosary was formed, the septenary planetary chain. The creative word was thus divided into the 7 vowels that acted on the soul of the disciple of the mysteries. All the creation myths are born from this experience, according to different points of view, experienced through, we can say, one of the 7 holy ones, one of the 7 etheric bodies of the Hierophants of Atlantis. So the mysteries of Atlantis are created anew in a form suitable for the post-Atlantis, for the aftermath of the flood. Again, all creation myths arise from the stories that the initiates of the mysteries told the people, so that they could receive evolutionary impulses. The initiates, in turn, followed the evolutionary indications for humanity given by the adepts of the mysteries, who in turn received them from the masters, that is, the 7 holy rishis. In turn, the 7 holy rishis were in harmony with the impulses that came from the Manu. So, to use an image, Manu, 7 holy rishis, adepts, initiates, and then the disciples, and all the rest of the people. What in the ancient mysteries was an experience became myth for the people. It was a way of recounting those experiences. It was, let's say, aimed at leading humanity to have certain experiences, even though not as directly and intensely as was the case for the initiates. And from there, from these experiences, a civilizing impulse was set in motion, which allowed civilization to be brought back to what it had been before the Great Flood. These evolutionary civilizing impulses always originated from the incorruptible oracle of the son of Atlantis, from the Manu, who emanated the forces of harmony of the 7 planets for human and earthly evolution. Here Steiner gives an example. He says that in the Vedas, we find that which was finally transcribed of a long oral tradition, originating in the experience of initiation, in which the word that creates worlds was experienced. However sublime the Vedas may be, they are an account of what was a direct experience in the ancient mysteries. And the same is true of all the sacred texts of humanity. Moreover, before becoming texts, they were an oral tradition, an unbroken chain of transmission from master to disciple. The ancient Indian initiates, therefore, experienced how the Brahman pronounced the word that creates worlds, Va, together with the harmony of the music of the spheres of the planets, and how these had been progressively woven into this rosary of the worlds that goes from ancient Saturn to the future Vulcan, passing by Earth, which we see precisely in our 7-fold diagram of evolution. The Rosary of Worlds is a cosmic rosary with 7 pearls that in turn are linked to other 7 pearls, and yet other 7, and yet other 7, and yet other 7, 5 times 7. Which in their becoming are a prayer put into action by the creator spirits, and in which the spirits that are not creators, such as human beings, gradually learn to become creators. Through this process, in which the word that creates worlds had progressively become interwoven in the cosmic rosary, in the rosary of the worlds, the creative word had condensed together with the music of the spheres to become the worlds, the planets, the forms that inhabit every world. In its becoming, the creative word, it took on different forms, assuming different appearances depending on the world. On Earth, it took on a mineral, plant, animal, and finally human form. So we find the word that creates worlds in minerals, plants, animals, and also in human beings. And the same process took place in a different way on the other planets, each with its own evolutionary mission and the adaptations that were necessary for that context, for that evolutionary environment. It was therefore possible to perceive the qualities of the spirits that inhabited these evolutionary environments, these celestial spheres, the planets. The ancient initiate knew that the sun gave life to the cosmos, emanating it from itself, giving it to the whole cosmos, to the earth, to nature, and to man. The moon, on the other hand, preserved, like an ancient fortress containing an archive, the ancient wisdom that underlay earthly existence. On earth, from lunar wisdom and solar life, love was to develop. So, on earth, an evolution was taking place. On ancient moon, before the current earth, everything was wisdom. It was the cosmos of wisdom, but love was absent. At the beginning of the current earth, everything came into being anew, in the wisdom that pervades nature. Halfway through the Lemurian era, something was added that by evolving over time would have become love, thus making the passage from lunar wisdom to earthly love. The wisdom of lunar evolution and the life of solar evolution together provided the conditions for the evolution of love on earth. The substance that was donated and that activated the process that leads from wisdom to love was karma, desire, what the Greeks called eros. Karma, desire, is an astral process capable of warming the soul, so to speak. The human being received karma from the Luciferic spirits. Although the Luciferic spirits were not regular spirits of evolution, they had remained behind from the ancient moon, they succeeded by instilling in the human being an element of rebellion against the divine plan of evolution. An anomaly with respect to the divine plan of evolution, but from this anomaly, we can say that the first form of love was able to develop, which is the lowest form. Kama or eros is the lowest form of love, sensual love, which, however, is the foundation for the evolution of soul love, philia, and of spiritual love, agape. So it's true that the Luciferic spirits are irregular and adversarial spirits, but by hindering humanity, they have donated to them a trait that, if made to evolve, can become love. Love united with freedom. Obviously, to accomplish this, it was then necessary to appeal to the superior solar forces for the intervention of Christ, the Spirit of the Sun. So there was a lunar intervention by the Luciferic spirits, who gave karma, the desire, and with it free will, the ability to choose good or bad, without, however, having full responsibility and awareness of it. In order that this could become love, it was necessary for the spirit of the sun to sacrifice itself on earth for humanity, so that this immature gift from the Luciferic spirits could mature and become freedom and love. So, in the Lemurian era, karma is added, which allows the real earthly evolution to begin, from wisdom to love. Steiner says that the word that creates worlds clothed itself with the strality of karma, of desire, in such a way that the ancient Indian initiates could experience the creative word resonating in desire. Karma as a garment of the love of the divine creator. The initiate felt that the creative word pronounced by God was wrapped in this astral garment of love. Into this astral garment would then descend the I, the spiritual principle, forming the Kama Manas, which in Western words, so to speak, is the lower earthly I, the incarnated I, that is, the human being incarnated on earth, who, first of all, desires to experience love through the senses, through earthly things, but who gradually, by sublimating it, spiritualizing it, can arrive to agape, to spiritual love. It is the Luciferic spirits who have made us interested in the sense-physical world. Through the senses, they have made us interested in earthly things. It is only through this garment, therefore, that the three spirits will develop out of the occult constitution of physical body, etheric body, astral body, and I. The manas, which will be born from the astral body, the buddhi, which will be born from the etheric body, and the atma, which will be born from the physical body. So, the Luciferic spirits have given us karma as interest in incarnation, in the things of the sense-physical world, and this interest, this sensual love, through the intervention of the Christ, will be able to become spiritualized and give rise to the three spirits, manas, buddhi, and atma. Of course, had only the Luciferic spirits acted, it would have been a totally hindering action. Everything was already contained as potential in the word that creates worlds, in the va, in the ta, in the vox, or if you will, in the tau. When man pronounced I am, and as he became more and more conscious, he became more and more man. When man today pronounces I am in full consciousness, having consciousness that the I is the spiritual principle that has incarnated into physical, etheric, astral, then he is really himself. For a moment, the very moment he pronounces I am, only in that instant is he really man. For in the I, man speaks, while in the astral he is animal, in the etheric he is plant, and in the physical he is mineral. Even in these lower unconscious bodies the I dwells, but it has not yet awakened. How can we describe this? We can say that the I am is in a coma in the physical body and in the mineral realm. The I am sleeps a dreamless sleep in the etheric body and in the plant realm. and the I am dreams in the astral body and in the animal kingdom. And it is awakening in the human being who, when saying I am, having full consciousness of it, in that instant is really man. The I am is fully awake. Now we must keep in mind that this initiation, which was possible in the Paleo-Indian epoch thanks to the 7 holy rishis, is possible today only when the disciple has already been initiated to various degrees. The disciple must have reached a certain degree of initiation and therefore be innerly predisposed to grasp what, due to the prevalence of the activity of the lower bodies, astral, etheric, and physical, they would not initially be able to experience. They would be in too much an externalized consciousness, in the things of the senses, in the karma. In ancient India, however, the master could transmit, through the name and the image, the word and the writing in a much more intense and powerful way than is possible today. This state can only be reached at higher degrees of initiation. The words, gestures, movements of the master were filled with magical forces that infused light and living strength into the images that were placed before the soul of the disciple. This awakening of the divinities in the soul, through name and image, was the foundation of the relationship between the guru and the chela, the master and the disciple. In ancient Egypt, too, the initiations were based on the magical forces that the master exercised on the disciple of the mysteries, just as it happened in Atlantis. This modality remained in existence from Atlantis until the first half of the Greco-Roman epoch, and then decayed. So much so that in the first half of the Greco-Roman epoch, when it was still practiced, these magical forces that operated from the master to the disciple were bearers of demons, no longer of gods, because gradually the karma had prevailed. The Luciferic spirits had corrupted the human astral body to such an extent that instead of recalling divinities, they recall demons. And it is here that the action of Christ comes into play, to awaken the disciple of the ancient initiation from this sleep of death to a new life. It is the resurrection of Lazarus. This mode of initiation through apparent death was practiced in ancient Egypt and is also called the microcosmic way of the Southern Mysteries. The Egyptians practiced it both as initiation and as therapy medicine. This method was used both to initiate and to heal. The Egyptian master, who was a priest, acted on the disciple by inducing a state of deep sleep and infusing spiritual images into this sleep that were capable of reconnecting either the patient, in the case of therapy, or the disciple, in the case of an initiation, to the spiritual world. Just as the Atlanteans encountered the gods in their sleep, the ancient Egyptian placed the disciple or the patient in a state of sleep within the temple. This sleep was induced through the use of natural substances. It was a real science. We can say that the heirs of this, in a certain way, are the practitioners of anesthesia today. So let's keep in mind that there is a continuity in these mysteries, that they are found in a form deprived of the element of the sacred in today's medicine, in particular in the branch of anesthesiology. Sleep was so profound that the disciple came close to death in a comatose state, and sometimes the disciples' candidates for initiation were not suitable and died. But it was, as it were, an act that meant giving themselves up so deeply in the service of the spiritual world that they took this transition to death in a very different way than we would take it today. They knew that they would return to earth with renewed forces so as to be able to become disciples of the priests of the mysteries. So they performed this final act of sacrifice in a devout way. The difference with the state of illness was that in the case of illness, the temple sleep was repeated for a shorter time. One did not rest in a state of mystical death for 3.5 days. Rather, one remained in a state of lesser death, so to speak. It was more slumber and less deep sleep, therefore less close to death, and it was repeated until the condition of anomaly that was generated by the astral body on the etheric body and on the physical body disappeared. So they were sedated. The appropriate images were brought into the astral body. They were woken up, and then days later, if they were healed, the therapeutic treatment ended there. Otherwise, it was repeated until the symptoms in the physical body disappeared. And obviously, rhythms were created by which the sick person went week after week, month after month, until these conditions disappeared. We can say that smaller doses of the same substances were given to the sick, so that one came less close to the threshold of death. It was less risky, and the process was repeated rhythmically over time and was especially connected with the festivities of the Egyptian calendar, some of which, by the way, still correspond to our festivities. For example, the Assumption, that corresponds to the heliacal rising of Sirius in ancient Egypt. So, let's keep in mind that therapies were connected also to the calendar. Even in the Catholic Church, there still remains today some of these ancient rituals, especially Egyptian ones, when they are related to healing. For example, if you have ever been to places where the rite of Saint Biagio is practiced for the blessing of the throat, this rite is done by placing 2 candles held in a cross and invoking the intercession of the saint. I happened to witness this in the town of Pietrasanta, but it is practiced in many areas. This is just to tell you that there are still such traces, especially in the Catholic Church, because, as you know, the Catholic Church is the only one among the Christian churches that, even with its ifs and buts, has remained in its ritual forms a continuity with the ancient mysteries, and in particular with the mysteries of the Southern Stream and with Mithraism. In the case, instead of the disciple of the mysteries, candidate for initiation, a real mystical death was induced, which could last up to 3.5 days. Therefore, without waking up for 3.5 days, an induced coma for 3.5 days. In this way, everything that was, we might say, chaotic in the astral body was brought back into harmony in intimate contact with the cosmic forces. So deep a contact that it allowed one to rise to the upper Devakan and thus put in order the physical, etheric, and astral bodies. Why 3.5 days? We know that Christ too travels for 3.5 days in the underworld. It is the same process on a higher arc. But 3.5 days were needed so that the entire cosmic evolution could be recapitulated. 1/2 day for the first half of the Earth mass, and 3 full days to go up to the 3 previous cosmic days, Moon, Sun, and Saturn. 3.5 plus 3.5 is 7. So it means that 3.5 days correspond to the first half of Earth mass, the Moon, Sun, Saturn. And they went back to the origin of ancient Saturn, precisely in the higher Devakan, or world of intuition, at the farthest limits of the cosmos, in the cosmic shell. In this beautiful image by Knapp, you see the cosmic shell placed at the top left. You see there is the band of the ecliptic with the zodiac signs. That is the cosmic shell of our cosmos, and inside you see a summa of all the ancient mysteries, arranged in a composition. What does it mean exactly? All the ancient mysteries tried to bring the human being as close as possible to the origin, always maintaining a certain state of consciousness that was the one suitable for each cultural epoch. So each cultural epoch had its own methods, but all were founded on the same ancient process that had been put into action in Atlantis, essentially. In Lemuria, the contact with the divine was such that, in a way, there was still a strong capacity to act directly on the elements and on the soul of man. It was a magical action of the wheel. Consequently, these primordial mysteries of Lemuria existed, but they had to do with the regular life of the Lemurians rather than with special candidates for initiation. So we can say that for the Lemurians, life was a continuous initiation, if you like. Here we also understand how, for the Egyptians, therapy was intimately connected to initiation, medicine to initiation, and therapy in a broader sense. However, today we must always keep in mind where it is appropriate to apply one or the other. You know well that, especially in the case of what we call psychotherapy, whoever needs psychotherapy should first complete their psychotherapy. And I'm using this term in a broad sense, and only then dedicate themselves to a spiritual path. Because whoever mistakes the spiritual path for psychotherapy puts into action one of the most devastating combinations from the point of view of the evolution of the soul and the health of the soul. So we must be aware that to be initiated, first of all, therapy is necessary, and once therapy is concluded, it becomes possible to arrive to initiation. So, although these two processes, therapy and initiation, have the same origin, be careful, because they are not the same thing. And it is good to be in a healthy condition. We're talking about physical health, but even more about psychic health, which is more subtle, before proceeding to the initiatory spiritual path. We also need to know that when we are not in balance for whatever reason, it is good to suspend any initiatory practice and dedicate ourselves to healing, to regenerating ourselves in a therapeutic sense, and then continue again. Finally, we must keep this in mind that if this magical action from master to disciple, which was performed in Atlantis and especially in the ancient mysteries, if it were performed today in the same powerful way, it would be anti-evolutionary, just as much as it was evolutionary at the time. It was as evolutionary in Atlantis, in the ancient mysteries, as it would be anti-evolutionary today after Christ, because you can well understand it limits the freedom of others. It is a direct action of the master on the disciple. However, we must be aware of the fact that it still happens today very often. Indeed, the majority of the time, those who seek spirituality, we can say the probationers, those who are put to the test to become disciples of esotericism, would like a master to act on them, to relieve them of suffering. They would like to make therapy the same thing as initiation, and for the master to induce in them with therapy what they mistake for an initiation. This difference must be clear already to the probationer, to the potential candidate for initiation. When this direct magical action between master and disciple is still perpetrated today, in the age of the consciousness soul, regressive impulses are introduced into evolution that cause one to return irregularly to what happened before Christ in the ancient mysteries and in Atlantis. In esoteric literature and also in the New Age, the fascination with what is ancient is often present, as if by discovering what is ancient, I can implement it today and obtain an evolutionary result. In Steiner, you will never find this statement, because if a soul's spiritual evolution is in place, recreating ancient conditions can only bring this soul's spiritual evolution backwards. Even from a logical point of view, if we want to be logical, we cannot be fooled when something ancient is proposed to us. Indeed, the more it is believed to be the original, in a certain sense, the worse it is, because it will be all the more effective in bringing us back to an ancient condition. So, the less it has been adapted to the evolution of the consciousness soul, the more regressive it is. This is the great deception that is put into action when one tries to practice what is called traditionalism, that is, pretending that the initiatory forms have to remain the same as they were in the beginning, that they must not change, and that when they change, they are anti-evolutionary. It is the exact opposite, obviously provided that they are changed according to the evolutionary principles suitable for the era of the consciousness soul. This is the great difference between what is called the traditionalist current of esotericism, of which, for example, an exponent was Evola, another Guénon, who also produced very beautiful writings from the point of view of symbolic commentary, but keep in mind that they are founded on this assumption that the initiatory forms cannot change, and if they change, it is bad. This is a principle that is in direct contrast with the Rosicrucians, who have a supersensible, therefore spiritual, continuity with what was the spiritual substance of the oracle of the sun, but one that is adapted in its forms according to the era, the people, the place, the soul's spiritual evolution. Thus, in traditionalism, we have that form equals substance. For the Rosicrucians, the same substance must adapt in form according to what the soul's spiritual evolution is. And it is this current that the Theosophical Society is a part of, and even more so the Anthroposophical Society and everything that is Theosophy and Anthroposophy. They are not the only ones, but to give you reference, Steiner joins the Theosophical Society precisely because he knows that the action of the Rosicrucians can be brought there. It is the Rosicrucians themselves who indicate to him to go to the Theosophical Society and bring it back to Christ. To give you an idea, from the foundation of traditionalism, one of the exponents of traditionalism today, perhaps you have heard of him, is Dugin, who is, let's say, behind the current image we have of part of the conflict between the East and the West. From an esoteric point of view, traditionalism has given the basis for fascism and Nazism. So they are not, they are not ideas that do not have an effect on reality, especially when they are combined with politics, since esotericism has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with the human being, but when the union between esotericism and politics occurs, it is just like the union between therapy and initiation. It is the most devastating thing that can be unleashed in a human society, in this case, rather than an individual. So keep in mind that if the master still acts directly on the disciple, we are back to the ancient mysteries. We return to Atlantis. The disciple who allows the master to act directly on his soul does so to relieve himself of suffering, a suffering that he feels and that he would like to sedate not by doing the work himself, but by having the master do it on him. This work is done in the forces of the sentient soul, which are the forces that were developed for the first time, matured for the first time in the Egypto-Chaldean epoch, therefore by the Egyptian people. A master who knows the practices of initiation but uses them directly, as in antiquity before Christ, without respecting the principle of the I in the consciousness soul, works directly on the sentient soul of the disciple. And in this way, serious damage is caused to the evolution of the consciousness soul, which is not yet complete, preventing its healthy development in the disciple. What is the effect of this? It is the spiritual dependence between the master and the disciple, because the master at that moment becomes the substitute I of the disciple. Since he is not awakening the evolutionary forces in the consciousness soul of the disciple, he is acting directly on the sentient soul. This relationship that is symbiotic of spiritual dependence between the master and the disciple, in which the master becomes the I of the disciple, thus preventing the healthy development of the consciousness soul, also precludes access to the development of the spiritual self, because one will return to a group soul, which is that of the master with his disciples. In this way, the astral body of the master is linked with the substitute I, which is the I of the master, and the substitute I of the master works on an astral body that is shared between the master and the disciples, a group soul. A group soul that has nothing to do with the conscious group soul, which is what we aspire to in order to reach the spiritual self. It is ascension to group soul. We can call it a symbiosis of the astral body of the master with that of the disciples, in which there is only one I. The other I, those of the disciples, will tend to move away. Their tendency will be to return to the supersensible worlds, and in a single entity will be created. So, keep in mind that what was evolutionary in Atlantis, the ancient mysteries, is anti-evolutionary today. It is a form of black magic that, when proposed as spiritual enlightenment, operated therefore by a master on a disciple, is the most harmful practice and the most widespread in esoteric circles. Not all of them, but certainly a large part, especially in the Eastern sense, are founded on this. So, here we can say that there are two dangers in initiation. One is to go, as I was saying before, in the direction of traditionalism, where form is equal to substance, and the claim that what is ancient is better than what comes later. When taken to its extreme consequences, this is the foundation of totalitarianism. And this is certainly a tendency that is arising in the modern world, in the world of ideologies, the post-industrial one. And the other danger is that of avoiding to work on one's internal imbalances and looking to have them relieved by someone else, by a master, who thus acts directly on the soul, creating a symbiotic bond with it and therefore generating ancient initiatory conditions where the only possessor of an I, the only one who is an I, is the master, while the disciples are dependent on him. So, in a regular evolutionary sense, the magical initiation from master to disciple continued. After Atlantis, from ancient India to Persia to ancient Egypt, through all the post-Atlantean cultural epochs, up to the fourth Greco-Roman epoch. Then, at the times described by the Gospels, the ancient mysteries were already in a state of decadence, as we have already mentioned. And it was then that the word that creates worlds, the Christ, you see here in this image that the Christ descends from the heights accompanied by his mother. You see this angel who prays for his coming and for the redemption of the ancient mysteries, now in a state of decadence. It was then that the word that creates worlds, the Christ, assumed full human form in Jesus of Nazareth, in such a way that the very being of the cosmic man, the Brahman, the Adam Kadmon, In a sense, also the Hercules of the Greeks comes back as Christ. The Word that became flesh was therefore the same Word that creates worlds, that raised the human being to the spiritual heights from which it had descended in the beginning. And with this, we have concluded this fourth meeting. I thank you for listening. Good evening to everyone. Good evening to you.